Hi everyone, my name is Christine Tolbert with the State Council on Developmental Disabilities, Orange County. For those of you who are unfamiliar with us, the State Council on Developmental Disabilities is an independent state agency established by federal and state law to ensure that people with developmental disabilities and their families receive the services and supports they need. Our services are provided at no cost, and we actively work with families and persons with developmental disabilities, as well as our local communities, to achieve a consumer and family-based system of individualized quality services and supports. We hope that this self-paced webinar supports you as you strive to learn about the independent facilitator and self-determination. We anticipate that some of you are considering becoming the independent facilitator for your family member, and many of you may want to become an independent facilitator as a business. This training is designed to address both perspectives. The Independent Facilitator and Self-Determination is a 6-part training, as you can see on your slide, and today we will be covering Part 1, an overview of self-determination. At the end of Part 1, there will be an activity which you will need to complete to move on to Part 2, and so on until you finish all 6 parts of the Independent Facilitator training. Instructions will be provided at the appropriate time during the training, and you will have access to this PowerPoint slideshow and any accompanying resources. Before we really get going with this PowerPoint, I want to strongly recommend that folks review the video noted there on your slideshow. It says DDS Self-Determination Video, and it has a link. This is the video on the DDS website self-determination page. It provides a quick snapshot of the self-determination program with a few testimonials and really sets the tone for this entire series. What we will be covering today, we will cover the historical context of self-determination, a self-determination review. Keep in mind, this is only an overview. If you need further details regarding the self-determination program, please reference the DDS website for those resources. We will look at an overview of the Financial Management Services, or an FMS acronym, and the budget. We will review examples of when self-determination is especially helpful and the different advisory committees, including how the State Council on Developmental Disabilities is involved in the program. The Self-Determination Pilot Program in California has been around since 1998 in 5 regional centers throughout the state. The intent was to provide more freedom to purchase services for underserved populations within the regional center system. It was so successful in terms of accessing needed services and in cost savings that it has now been phased into 2,500 individuals with developmental disabilities throughout the state. In 2021, it will be an option for anyone within the regional center systems under the Lanterman Act eligibility. This recent self-determination program, unlike the pilot, began in October of 2013 when Governor Brown signed the self-determination program into law. To see specific outcomes of the self-determination pilot program, please refer to the link noted on the PowerPoint. Other states who do not have the Lanterman Act and dedicated funding have been implementing self-determination for many years. Much of our content included in various parts of this 6-part training have come from those in other states, whose great insight is helpful for us here in California. Self-determination is a paradigm shift, a huge change in the law that allows for much more freedom, flexibility, and control over services and supports. It is also a voluntary service option. In the traditional model, the first person to call when you need something is typically the regional center or service coordinator. With self-determination, the first person is really the person served or their chosen designee. For further information regarding the contrast between typical regional center services versus self-determination services, please see the link for the DDS website. Eligibility. You must have a regional center case under the Lanterman Act. This is generally for folks over the age of 3, but there are a few exceptions. You must also live at home or in the community. You are not eligible for self-determination if you live in some kind of long-term care facilities, unless you are in the process of moving into the community within about 3 months. Also, you must be willing to receive training and comply with the program's rules. As previously mentioned, in typical regional center services, you call the regional center to request a service and they respond with a yes or a no. With self-determination, the center is the budget, which can then be spent on services and supports according to the IPP. And as a reminder, the soft rollout began in October of 2019 during the phase-in period, but by June of 2021, it will be available to all as an option. To give you a brief example and a bit of humor in an ultra-simplified version, we will review an example of the difference between the two programs before we really move into the details of self-determination. In the traditional model, you want awesome therapy. You've tried all programs offered and none quite meet your needs. You have letters from professionals to back up your request for awesome therapy. Your regional center service coordinator says that awesome therapy isn't vendored with their regional center and takes the request to their internal committee. 3 weeks later, you get a denial letter. You appeal the denial and you wait up to 50 days for a decision, and you might lose. With self-determination, you want awesome therapy. You make sure there's enough money in the budget to pay for awesome therapy. You talk with awesome therapy and you come to an agreement about the number of hours and the rate that they will be providing those services to you. You give those hours and rate information to your FMS, your financial management service, who makes sure that awesome therapy has the required certifications and that staff don't have criminal records. You start receiving awesome therapy. The whole process takes a few days, but certainly less than up to 50 days post-appeal. The 5 principles of self-determination. These are the leading principles. Freedom. Freedom to choose where and with whom you will live and to decide what important things you will do with your life now and in the future. Authority. Authority over how the money is spent and to set standards for things like programs and staff. To make your own decisions rather than rely on someone else to decide for you. Support. Support should be individually designed to meet your unique needs and also should be aimed at helping you live your chosen life. That comes from freely chosen family, friends, and paid supports. Responsibility. Responsibility for spending public dollars wisely and responsibility for making decisions and accepting responsibility for them, for exercising citizenship. And confirmation. This is really the closing of the circle by providing feedback and sharing insights about your experiences in the self-determination program and to really be leaders in crafting the system in California. The key players. We have this listed as support. The person served is always at the center, including chosen family and friends, the regional center service coordinator, an independent facilitator. Note, this is an optional service paid for out of the person's budget. The facilitator can be a service coordinator from the regional center at no cost if you choose. If you hire an independent facilitator, it will always need to be paid for out of your or the person's budget. And the FMS, the financial management service. This is required, and we will cover this in the next slide. The process. This is just a glimpse of the process of self-determination. Each of these listed parts will be covered in detail in a different part of this 6-part series. Person-centered planning, budget, spending plan, and more details about the financial management service, criminal background checks, fingerprinting for the safety and security of those with developmental disabilities. Financial management services. This is typically the #1 discussion item in many of our trainings, so we moved it to part 1 with a bit more detail. An FMS service is the only required service in self-determination that's vendored by the regional center. Each approved FMS vendor can be found on the DDS website, which you can reference according to the regional center or geographic location. I will be referring to the financial management services as FMS. They are essentially the bank for the self-determination budget. The money for the person served goes directly to the FMS for payments and disbursement of services. Again, on your slide, as a reminder, the FMS is required, it is paid for out of the individual's budget, and they manage the money and pay the bills, but they don't make budget decisions. They also maintain financial records and generate monthly spending reports. Depending on the model you choose, they may manage taxes, workers' comp, liability insurance. They will, however, always ensure that provider legal requirements are met, such as background checks and certifications. We will provide you with the resource that details the specific rates, maximum amounts, and which of their different models you may choose for your self-determination service. Again, this DDS memo noted on the bottom of your slide, dated 2/21/18, will have the details regarding the FMS models. That will be included as a resource for you. The budget. There are a few ground rules with the budget. One, you cannot purchase generic services with self-determination funds. An example of generic services include supplemental security income, in-home supportive services, school district services for those who are school aged, or Department of Rehabilitation Services. And the budget will pay for your facilitator as an option if you choose to hire an independent facilitator, and it will definitely pay for FMS services. So to be clear, if you choose to hire your service coordinator as your independent facilitator, there is no charge to you. Additionally, a family member may serve as your IF at no charge to you, depending on the circumstances. The amount of the individual budget is based on how much was spent on the person served over the last 12 months. You can determine the amount that was spent last year by asking the regional center. If you're new to the system, it will be an estimate based on the identified needs through the IPP. The budget may also be adjusted for various reasons: changing circumstances, unaddressed or unmet needs, or underutilized needs. An example of a changing circumstance is moving from an adult transition program to post-secondary education, independent living, day services, or employment. An unaddressed or unmet need, we will address this in a future part of this training, but they must be detailed clearly in your IPP. And underutilized needs. An example of this would be you have respite authorized, but you're unable to use all of the hours or any of them due to workforce shortages in your area or other similar barriers to utilizing a service. Please note, this will be covered again in 2 additional sections of this training, but this is just to help get you thinking of the various possible budget adjustments. The budget, as with all things regional center related, is part of the IPP team decision or the planning team. The regional center has to certify the budget. This is where people are most likely to exercise their right to a fair hearing, though it should be noted very few occurred under the pilot project. Please note how these strategies worked for you and provide feedback into your own planning process. If the outcomes were not what you were hoping for or expecting, perhaps it's time to rework those strategies. So on your slide, it reminds us that the budget is redetermined each year, going up or down depending on changing needs and our advocacy strategies. And again, those strategies feed back into the planning process. A quote from the Lanterman Act regarding the budget. The regional center certifies on the individual budget document that regional center expenditures for the individual budget, including any adjustment, would have occurred regardless of the individual's participation in the self-determination program. This means that your budget cannot be increased simply to pay for self-determination related services. So, for example, the budget can't be increased simply to pay for the FMS or an independent facilitator of your choosing. These expenses are specific to self-determination and would not be justified for a budget increase. Self-determination is really helpful when, given the outside of the box structure of the self-determination program, it can work for anyone. However, there may be situations when self-determination is especially helpful. Examples include a person has a complicated life, many plates spinning in regard to services and supports with high medical and behavioral needs. Or a person has had a lot of denials, fair hearings, and conflicts with the regional center. A person has lost services due to changes in the Lanterman Act or budget cuts, such as equestrian therapy or swimming. Maybe a person needs or wants unique services that are not typically available through the regional centers. Or someone wants to start a business, get work training, or a great paying job. Or a person is simply ready to take on the responsibility, with or without help. Take some time to think of some examples yourself. Hint, this may be your activity following this part of this training. The role of the Self-Determination Advisory Committee, or the SDAC. The purpose of the local advisory committees for each regional center, 21 in all, is to provide insight and advice to the regional center in its implementation of self-determination. The meetings are open to the public. Half of the local Self-Determination Advisory Committee membership are appointed by the regional center, and the other half by the State Council on Developmental Disabilities. The objectives of the local Self-Determination Advisory Committee are to ensure that the work is getting done, not to do the work. The statewide Self-Determination Advisory Committee, or the statewide SDAC, this group is made up of the chair of each of the local 21 committees, or a designee. They meet at least twice per year. They work to identify best practices. They determine effective consumer and family training materials, voice implementation concerns, identify and address systemic issues, recommend program improvements, and effective ways for participants to find services and supports. The statewide Self-Determination Advisory Committee is hosted by the State Council on Developmental Disabilities. The State Council. We work to synthesize information from the statewide Self-Determination Advisory Committee, local advisory committees, and other sources. We then share this information with their stakeholders and make recommendations to increase the program's effectiveness and furthering the principles of self-determination. The DDS Work Group. DDS has had a work group of many stakeholders meeting for many years and is composed of various stakeholders. They meet regularly to continue to iron out the details of self-determination. It's activity time. So please take a few minutes to respond to the next slide labeled activity in the upper right corner. Please email us your response at orangecounty@scdd.ca.gov. Upon receipt of your response, we will then send you the link for the Independent Facilitator and Self-Determination Part 2, which is the Budget and Spending Plan. Here's your activity. Self-determination is really helpful when describe someone who would likely benefit from self-determination over traditional regional center services and provide some detailed examples. I provided some general examples as noted previously in the training to give you a bit of a jumping off point as you think to describe someone. Maybe a family member, maybe someone you hope to be an IF for, or just someone you choose to construct for purposes of this activity. We are looking for life details, not any confidential information about someone else. Thank you. As a reminder, please respond to the slide labeled activity just before this one in the upper right corner. Email us your response at orangecounty@scdd.ca.gov. Upon receipt of your response, we will then send you the link for part 2, the budget and spending plan. Thank you for participating in part 1 of the Independent Facilitator and Self-Determination training. Take care.